This is the fastest setup we've ever had for Golden Black Live. It's Stacy and Brian. They are definition of gamers. So is Barron and Gordon back there. We are ready for the show today. Friday, November 7th edition, Purdue, Wisconsin. And the Boilermakers, to say it's going to be a challenge tomorrow, it just seems to be, with the injuries and everything else, Purdue will have a big task in front of it tomorrow, Stacy, would you say?
Oh, no question. The players talked before the season about how they wanted to go to a bowl game this year, and in order to do that, Purdue has to win its last 3 games, this being one of them, obviously, and it's a really difficult matchup, as it has been for Purdue for the last 8 years at least, when they haven't won in that stretch. Wisconsin has a really good running game, as it always does, and Purdue's run defense. I think people were excited a little bit about what Purdue's run defense did last week against Nebraska. I'm one of the people who is like, well, their best running back got hurt, and how really can you say that was, I mean, with what they had to go against, that's all they can control, I get that, but Nebraska's offense is not nearly as dynamic when their best player is on the bench, so Purdue's defense needs to be much better this week. Without Frankie Williams, we know that he's done. He has that concussion. Howard may be out too. He's a game time decision, and he is one of your most important players in stopping the run, obviously being the big guy inside. So, yeah, and that's saying nothing of Purdue's offense trying to figure it out without Danny Anthrop.
And Brian, Wisconsin obviously is power this, power that. They can do a lot of things that on the paper, Purdue's going to have a hard time stopping.
When you look at what they did last week, yes, they did a pretty good job against the run. Yes, they started off well. You referenced Amir Abdullah getting hurt right away.
Right.
He had, I think he had 1 yard on 6 carries. Didn't he, or 5 yards on 6 carries when he left the game? Purdue's obviously going to have to sell out to stop Melvin Gordon. But what got Purdue last week? It wasn't the tailbacks. It was Tommy Armstrong getting loose for those 27 and 29-yard runs. Tanner McAvoy now kind of rotates in at quarterback for Wisconsin, runs the read option, has 2 rushes this year of 60 or more yards. Right. I think 2 weeks ago, too, for a touchdown. So Purdue has to account for the quarterback, too. And that the more bases you have to cover in a run game like this, the harder it is, especially when you're as banged up as Purdue's defense is and your ranks are pretty thin and not quite as experienced as you'd like to be.
Yeah, I think it's all good points. How this show works, if you're new to it, you can be in the chat room, which you are by definition if you're watching, so you can send us questions. We'll be happy to do our best to answer them. We also will have a guest in the second segment. Brian Cardinal will be joining us, and we'll be talking basketball and whatever Brian wants to talk about, I suppose. We also have sponsors that we want to thank. Hilton Garden Inn, when tomorrow's a big day. Stay at HGI tonight. Triple X on the hill, but on the level of Purdue tradition since 1929. Hilton Garden Inn, when tomorrow's a big day. Stay at HGI tonight. And I repeat that, I think. Well, that's 2 for them. And John Basham and Basham Reynolds, and, of course, State Farm agent Trent Johnson. The Purdue has that the opportunity, and you look at tomorrow's games, and matchups are everything in the world of sports. And maybe timing is also everything. And that injury thing, attitude-wise, I mean, it's hard to tell. But in terms of what you saw in practice this week, what did you see?
Certainly when you look at the Danny Anthrop injury, that's the one that everybody is really concerned about because what's left in the receiving core. And so on Tuesday and Wednesday, I kind of stalked, for lack of a better term, Kevin Sherman and the receivers, tracking them all throughout practice, and because I wanted to get that sense. Okay, D'Angelo Yancey is the guy who you would like to maybe feel like, okay, I'm the guy now. I'm going to take this role, and I'm going to be the guy. And I just didn't get that sense from him specifically that he was any different this week than he has been, which was really disappointing. I think generally, personally, everything has been disappointing with D'Angelo Yancey this year for me. So I don't know if it was necessarily surprising. But, a guy like Cameron Posey could be another guy like that. Trey Hart's going to be somebody who's going to play more snaps this week. Maybe Miles Norwood, maybe Shane Akeski, who hasn't played a single snap on offense this year.
Right.
So in terms of sense of urgency from the rest of the receiving group, I didn't really see it this week in practice. Austin Appleby is a guy who is going to have to be the one to pull those receivers and get them going, I think. And I think he tried to do that this week. I noticed several sideline conversations he had with those guys and really trying to get them going. But ultimately, Appleby can throw the ball in your area. If you don't catch it, it's on you.
That's what I was just going to say. Appleby can't get them open. He can't beat the man coverage himself, and that's up to these guys. Now, you mentioned D'Angelo Yancey. not really having a very productive season. That's very disappointing for Purdue. You know, it was right before the season, Darrell Hazel was talking about Yancey taking that next step and becoming Purdue's alpha. He has taken a step back. Now, I kind of wonder, he was really good as a freshman. Was he really good as a freshman, or was he the product of a lot of one-sided results where Purdue was just flinging the ball around? I personally think he was pretty good last season. He had a lot of promise coming into this one, but he very obviously has not taken the next step. I don't know how much of that is effort. It certainly looks like it's part of it. Perhaps maybe he came into this season perhaps believing he was a more accomplished player than he actually was because of some of the plays he made last season. But obviously that's been one of the great disappointments of the season, offensively at least.
Yeah, and not to take anything away, but I mean, yes, you were right about statistically. A couple of his receptions came at the end of the games where he got, he had the 200+ yard games, I think it was last
more than
year.
that.
So it was,
I think he had a couple.
Yeah, and
100-yard
I know against Nebraska and against Indiana, I mean, there were others, but the point is that it's a whole new world too when people start to really focus on you, and I think that's a problem.
Well, if you go back and look at his season last year, he scored 2 touchdowns. They came with Purdue down like 5 touchdowns in both cases. To his credit, he has scored 3 touchdowns this year, so he has already outpaced that productivity, and he made that catch against Notre Dame. That's still probably the catch of the year. However, that makes it even more frustrating. When a guy like that shows you what he's capable of, and then he doesn't do it again, it just makes it all the more frustrating.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of what we will, if you're a Purdue fan, what you have to have tomorrow, I would think, is the ability to keep Wisconsin off the field somehow. If the weather sounds like it's going to be okay, though windy and cold maybe, but that shouldn't be any big surprise to anybody. And Purdue played in those conditions last week to some extent, or to a great extent, certainly out at Nebraska. But, I mean, if you were going to dream up a Purdue win, what specific things will have to happen for that to come to pass?
Well, certainly you want the running game to produce. And Darrell Hazel said they're going to use more. Well, I don't know if he used the word more. That might be my word.
I think he used the word more.
Did he? Okay. Of Hunt
If you're
and
about to
Mostert.
say what I think
Yeah,
you
Hunt
said,
and Mostert together.
Yeah, he said more.
I talked pretty extensively about that on the pregame radio show today, so check that out. I break that down each week in the Boilermaker Breakdown, how many yards those guys get when they're on the field together. So shameless plug on that. I'm not going to tell you the answer right now. But if they do, you would like to generate some yards in the rushing game, obviously. But the big thing for me is you got to complete passes on 3rd and 4th. Well, hopefully not 4th down. I guess you don't want to get to 4th down. But Kyle and I broke that down this week in the Express. They were 1 for 18
Right. Yeah.
on 3rd and 4th downs passing against Nebraska. That is, and again, not all Appleby, but wow, you got to get the drives extended, and that's how you do it, is complete some passes. So to me, best case scenario, you were able to run the ball some, and then you just extend drives, like you said. I mean, to keep Wisconsin's offense off the field, you got to have guys that are going to make the plays. I would love to see Justin Sims get the ball more consistently this week. I think you're going to absolutely see a Hunt get the ball every which way, just to be able to kind of try to extend drives.
Yeah.
When Purdue's been good offensively the past month, it's been making big plays. It has to make big plays. Absolutely has to, because I think if you go back and break down the past month, you've seen Purdue is good offensively when it can get big plays in the running game and can get big plays in the passing game. Now, the guy who was making all the big plays in the passing game is gone.
Right.
Danny Anthrop accounted for 49% of their receiving yards in the past 4 games since Appleby's been the starting quarterback. So what you have to do is you have to generate some big chunk plays, as Darrell Hazel calls them, in the running game. Wisconsin has given up fewer double-digit gains from a defensive standpoint of anybody in the country. So it's certainly not going to be easy, but Purdue has to get Akeem Hunt and Raheem Mostert out in the open field in this particular game. Has to.
Yeah, I think to maintain some kind of balance against Wisconsin, that's going to happen. Question or a comment from Vortex just on what the weather was and what the attendance is going to be. I'm going to guess attendance will be in 35 to 38,000 tomorrow. I don't know that for sure. Again, winds. It's supposed to be a cool day, but walk-ups on games like this. It's not like 10,000 people decide to come if the weather's going to be good this time of year. So it'll be what it'll be. But in Wisconsin, I don't know exactly how many they're bringing. They have historically traveled pretty well, and 7,000-8,000 folks. Iowa and Michigan State both brought pretty good sized contingents and their bands. and that made a difference from that standpoint in terms of having folks in the stands. All right, we're on to topic 2, and that is this series. And when will this series be competitive? If you're a Purdue fan, you want to hope that it's tomorrow. Stacy did some research. 27 points, I believe, is the average spread in the last 7 losses dating back to 2005. So nearly 4 touchdowns on that front. Brian, you've covered recruiting since the beginning of recruiting, it seems. And Wisconsin and Purdue were
I know. Like, oh,
Wisconsin
there you
and
go, man.
Purdue were on a relatively even plane in the early days of Joe Tiller. Wisconsin obviously recruits well to what they need, but this is a program that has certainly surpassed where a lot of programs are. But and Purdue's not been in the same point.
Yeah, well, obviously 2 things come to mind. One, Wisconsin has been very good. You have
Yeah.
to give them a lot of credit.
Oh, absolutely.
That is a great program at this point. 2, when you look at what Wisconsin's been able to do against Purdue on the ground, you don't count it up in yards, you count it up in miles over the
Yeah.
last 5 years. They have absolutely dominated on the ground. That's what Wisconsin does. It also plays to Purdue's weakness over the past few years on defense. They have not been the sort of physical defense you want to field in the Big Ten. And, we always talk about it's a bad matchup for Purdue. People get tired of that. We get tired of saying it, so don't get mad at us. But this particular matchup is very difficult because Purdue, it's been years since Purdue's fielded a defense that has a sort of size, physicality, and mentality, all that goes into it, that can stack up against a really, really physical, really, really cultural-driven ground game like Wisconsin.
Well, yeah,
They do that to a lot of people, too.
Yeah,
so
oh, yeah,
I don't
absolutely.
think this
Not
is just a
just
Purdue
Purdue.
issue.
Yeah, and the last 2 wins in the series for Purdue, 2000 and 2003, Purdue was able to slow Wisconsin's run game. That was a long time ago, and of course, I think Kyle Orton in the 2003 game chucked it 55 times as well for Purdue to get that win. Stacy, one thing, and I'll throw it out to both of you, that Wisconsin's defense, and we've had some internal discussion about, is it really, they're ranked first in the country in a number of categories. One of them being yards given or plays under 10 or over 10 yards, giving up the fewest of those. But their schedule is a little suspect, I guess, and yet I was impressed the fact that they beat Maryland and Rutgers as badly as they did.
Well, it was like 89-7 a combined
Correct,
score
that's a
in
lot.
those 2 games. Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen Wisconsin's defense very much this year, but just listening to Daryl Hazel, to me, the biggest concern for Purdue's offense is that Wisconsin's going to play press man coverage on the outside, which is the same thing we're saying every single week. But guess what? Until Purdue shows that it can actually beat that, teams are going to keep doing that. And when teams are able to take your players away on the outside, they can box. They can throw a bunch of guys in the box and stop your run game. So I think from a game plan standpoint, it's going to be really interesting to see how Purdue tries to attack this defense. I don't know if there's obviously we saw Purdue have success against Michigan State when they were doing all those kind of short passing games. But since then, teams have said, nope, we're not going to let you do that. So Purdue has to find a way to win and put a bunch of yards up when they can't do those kind of short, throw it into the flat and let those guys make plays. They have to complete passes downfield. Now, I don't know if Wisconsin's defense is going to allow that. The big thing with them is they, fake blitzing. They'll look like they're bringing a bunch of guys. They'll drop guys off. And Daryl Hazel says a lot of the times they're still only bringing 4 or 5 guys. But Robert Kugler is going to be really important this week, Purdue's center, to be able to figure out what's going on. But it's not just him, it's him on out. We saw in practice this week D'Angelo Yancey as receiver. They were telling him he needs to say certain things when he sees things, even like a corner blitz. Say alert, 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 he's coming. It has to be talking all across the Purdue's offensive front. And that communication is really important. So we'll see if Purdue can communicate well enough to actually put points up against a defense that either is good or isn't good. I don't know. I still don't know that yet. I agree with that.
Brian, you have to give Wisconsin, like you said, credit, and Barry Alvarez credit for being able to do a regime change to some extent, being able to hire Gary Anderson and bring in a seems to be a very, very good transition. But this is a program, like you said, that presents a lot of challenges for not just Purdue, but really for everybody.
Yeah, that's what Wisconsin's been, for the better part of 10, 15 years now. If not longer, extremely physical, all over the place. They have changed a little bit on defense. When Anderson came in, they moved from the 4-3 to the 3-4. This year, from a personnel standpoint, they have a lot of relatively new guys out there. What they've done is they've switched a little bit from a philosophical standpoint to having those big, gigantic, corn-fed guys out there on defense who are going to overwhelm you physically, to incorporating more speed and some smaller guys, incorporating more speed at the expense of size and brawn and whatnot, to better be able to guard the spread offenses that are being run everywhere, which would describe Purdue right now.
Yep.
So obviously Wisconsin's always going to be difficult to run between the tackles on, but they're also going to be difficult to spread out now that their personnel is a little bit more in line with that sort of offensive philosophy.
All right, we have a couple minutes left in the segment. Brian Cardinal has shown up, which we're delighted about that as well, and we will have him in segment 2. But one last comment: what defines success from here on out for Purdue? Winning 3 more games would certainly do that, but is it enough? And I'll start by saying I think it probably is enough if they can at least get one more win and maybe 2. And I know no coaches and no players want to talk about just winning one more game, but it is important after the Illinois win that you get another one to hang your hat on, I would think.
I would like to see them compete this week. Before the season, that was kind of my barometers. I just want them to be a more competitive team. I think there's no question that that's what this team has been, more competitive
question,
throughout the
yeah.
year. So already in that sense, I think that there's absolutely no doubt that this team is better, and it's moving in a direction that the coaching staff wants it to go. So I don't think that – I think I picked them for 4 wins, maybe 5 at the beginning of the year. So I don't think – so not getting a bowl doesn't matter to me.
Yeah,
you know what
no,
I mean?
I agree with that.
So, and I don't think that's going to happen because I think they're going to lose this weekend. But I think that if you compete this weekend and then you win one of the 2 last couple games, then that's success. Because it's a progression, and that's what it needs to be for this program when you are rebuilding.
It would be great to beat Indiana,
Yeah.
obviously, for a wide variety of reasons. A, it's a big game for people that people care about. B, you would go into the offseason with some momentum. And C, it would help recruiting. It certainly couldn't hurt recruiting. It might really help recruiting because, right now they're trying to put an emphasis on, recruiting some of the best players in Indiana. And that game does matter. It really does matter in recruiting. And there are some guys still kind of straddling the line between Purdue and Indiana in recruiting that the result of that game could influence. So I think you've already seen progress, very distinct progress this season. This is an entirely different team than it was last year, and I think that's a big positive, even if you don't win another game. If you don't win another game, obviously that would be very disappointing, considering you've had a lot of opportunities, and you will have at least 2 more opportunities after this weekend. But if you only win 1 more game, I think you'd really like to beat Indiana.
Yeah, and in all fairness, too, if you look at the schedule going back to after the Illinois game, the teams that Purdue's had to deal with, Minnesota certainly took a big step back, losing when they lost to Illinois. But this is the schedule got a lot more difficult, and yet the last 2 games, at least on paper, are teams that should be. Purdue's been a 10-point or more underdog in every Big Ten game, with maybe arguably the exception of the Iowa game, and that including the Illinois game. So that is, I think, you'll see that be a little bit different when Northwestern comes calling, and not that Purdue's going to be a large favorite in either one of those last 2 games as well. So, all right, we're going to take a short break, and then bring Brian Cardinal in to replace Stacy Clarity, who is wearing, is that Cardinal? It's a Cardinal red, I think, today. So, and we'll look forward.
It's Husky red, whatever.
It's
that
Husky
is.
red, that's right. We forgot. By the way, how are they doing?
We got a big win against Ball State earlier this week.
So-
On the MAC, they play like on Tuesdays
I
and
know.
Wednesdays.
So they always seem to have good years up there. So we will do that. Brian Newbert will stay with us, and we will do segment 2 with Brian Cardinal on Gold and Black Live.